Hello, my name is Meredith Bennett, and I'm going to talk about the role of language in Indigenous science. If you've ever written a science essay, you can probably recall the challenges of trying to find just the right journal articles to cite and agonizing over your word choice. Now imagine that sense of place was just as important to how you use language. Your essay would look a lot different. It might not even be in a written format. Well, sense of place is often a fundamental component of Indigenous language, and consequently, it shapes the nature of Indigenous science. So what is a sense of place, and why is it important for Indigenous science? People often define place as a tangible area, a geography. But in Indigenous culture, sense of place can also include concepts, emotions, memories, and identities connected to a geographical space. This means sense of place can serve many purposes in Indigenous culture, like ceremony, spirituality, and science. Indigenous sense of place is intrinsically linked to language. Indigenous languages contain symbolic elements that form the structure of an Indigenous people's knowledge and worldview. In fact, much of Indigenous knowledge is expressed orally, especially in the form of storytelling. For example, Indigenous Australians presented their knowledge of astronomy in the form of dreaming stories. Indigenous people's knowledge of their environment is extraordinary. They need to know about the environment because their lives depend on it. Many of the crops we enjoy today, including corn, beans, and potatoes, were first domesticated by the native people of the Americas. Native Americans also discovered the active ingredient in aspirin by harvesting willow bark. Indigenous people also have important insights into ecology and animal behavior. Inuit people have greatly contributed to our knowledge of the elusive bowhead whale. 2 new species of wolf were also identified by First Nation peoples in British Columbia, and Indigenous Australians first observed the amazing behavior of certain kites and falcons that carry burning sticks to intentionally spread fire. With all of these amazing Indigenous discoveries, why aren't there more Indigenous scientists, and why don't we learn about Indigenous science in school? Indigenous science has been excluded from Western science because of the long, painful history of colonialism, oppression, and assimilation of Indigenous peoples. Indigenous knowledge systems and languages have often been oppressed, and in some cases even made illegal. It is not uncommon for Western scientists to take advantage of an Indigenous community's knowledge without consulting them or involving them in other parts of the research process. All of these actions contribute to the myth of a standard science language, which relies almost exclusively on Western forms of knowledge. This standard science language is taught in schools, and generally excludes aspects of language that are important in Indigenous cultures, like storytelling and experiential communication. As we have learned, Indigenous people have vast amounts of traditional knowledge that can help us better understand the natural world. More broadly, however, Indigenous scientists bring important perspectives to the table because of their unique knowledge systems and languages. When diverse perspectives are at work together, scientific methods can be used to ask many more interesting questions that would have been overlooked from the Western science perspective. There are several examples of this collaboration already taking place. For example, the Canada Science and Technology Museum has an exhibit co-curated by Wilfred Buck, a member of the Cree First Nation, that teaches traditional Indigenous star stories alongside traditional astronomical knowledge. Inuit people on Victoria Island, Canada, are also collaborating with Western scientists to understand the consequences of climate change, especially in relation to Arctic animals like muskoxen. These are promising first steps, but there's still a lot of work to be done to amplify Indigenous voices in science. One thing you can do is further educate yourself about the importance of Indigenous science and discoveries Indigenous people have made.